Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Restored to More. We are so excited. We are going to be sharing a little bit more on the podcast. We kind of just felt led, like there's some things that are dear to our heart, and we just want to be able to share more of our story. You know, there's only two episodes on the podcast that really envelop my story and Clint's story, and it was a long time ago, it feels like. And so we just want to continue to allow you guys in on our journey and our story from different angles. And the more that we lead couples through courses, we just get reminded of things. We're like, man, like we really should talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah. And on top of that, you guys continue to reach out and you're like, hey, can you do a podcast on this and a podcast on this? And it is sometimes hard to find somebody who is available to teach on that topic, somebody who is skilled on that topic and is available to teach on that at the same time. And so we want to make sure that your answers or your questions are getting answered and that we are continuing to share our story, because I think there's just so much power in relating and relatability.
Yeah, we're never going to pretend like we know it all. And we are, again, like I want to say this over and over again, we are not clinicians, we are not therapists, we are not pastors. We are just a couple who is sharing our story. And we are just believing that God has called us to share a story and that it will plant seeds and give hope. And so then he will do the rest.
So good. So today we are talking about what it is like to miss pornography, which is a super weird topic. So I think we should definitely pray before we begin.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It was actually Charity's idea, but it's a good idea. Thank you for saying that. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for the people listening to this right now. I personally just want to pray for them right now, Lord, wherever they're at. You don't really listen to our podcast because you're excited to listen to this podcast. It's not like the other podcasts that are like hobby focused or fun focused or even like, you know, personal development focused. These are like, oh, I listen to this because there's issues and there's problems, or maybe they're a leader and maybe people are coming to them in their church and they're asking for advice, and a pastor is listening to this podcast weekly and just trying to get insights to help people. Maybe they're a small group leader for young men or young women trying to just understand pornography and sexual brokenness and betrayal and what that looks like and what it does to a person. More often than not, God, I think the people listening to this are couples who've gone through this that have a similar story to us, and they're hurting and they're in pain and they're trying to have hope. They're trying to move forward, and it's really tough to do so, God, on a daily and hourly basis. Lord, I just pray that right now they would be encouraged, that right now they actually would feel your presence in this very moment, and they would go, man, I know, Jesus, that you are with me, that you'll never forsake me, you'll never leave me, that you're walking with me, you're in front of me, you're behind me. You're actually the one holding me up right now with your righteous right hand, allowing me to be right here in this moment, listening to this podcast, whatever you're doing. I just would tell you right now that Jesus is with you and he's got you and he's led you this far. He's going to keep leading you. And all he requires of us is that we would surrender and humble ourselves and let him lead us. Jesus, thank you so much, God, that you're always providing, you're always guiding, and you're always talking to us. You're always willing to have a conversation, Lord, that we would be able to quiet ourselves enough to hear your voice, to hear what's next, to hear that you have got us, to hear your precious promises, God, that you have told us about and have written out in your word, that we would be mindful of them right now, and that we'd be actually able to feel your presence and know that you are with us, God. Even if we can't feel you, we can know that you're with us, that you never leave us or forsake us. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you so much. Bless our time right now. Bless this conversation. We kind of have an outline, God, but our agenda is always that you would speak through us and take over every episode that we ever record. In your name, amen.
Amen. So we were in a group that we were leading this week, and someone in the group was just talking about missing pornography, and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this. Is this, because this is definitely something that was part of our story, and we're like, well, what better way than talk about it on the podcast so that thousands of people can listen, and hopefully it just resonates with you. And so I just want to kind of share with you the beginning of where this happened in our own relationship. And I'll never forget the words of Clinton saying that to me. So we were early on in recovery, and I remember him just feeling sad and just grieving after a therapy session. And I remember him looking at me and saying, Charity, I'm grieving over missing pornography. And I was like, what just came out of your mouth? was that a serious saying? Was that serious that you just said that? And I was shocked. I was shocked that that came out of your mouth. I was just really taken back by the fact that you're like, I miss pornography. I'm like, why would you ever miss something that was so hurtful and ugly and damaging? And we talked about it more, but I just want to even just like start with that.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
What did you feel? Like, I know that you don't have your feelings word list in front of you that we've created, but what would you say in that moment you felt when I said that?
I would say I felt disturbed and disgusted
Mm.
because I didn't understand. I was so disturbed at the fact, like, why would you miss something that was so damaging to you, to me, to our relationship?
Wow.
And then I was kind of just disgusted, like, ew, like that didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand it at all. But the more that I was like, talk to me, what does that mean? And do you miss it so much that you want to go back to it? Does that mean like, okay, you're gonna go back to it, you miss it so much?
Wow.
So I'm grateful that we kind of like dug deep into what you meant by that.
Well, I'm really grateful you were curious. It's a pretty big deal. So yeah, well, basically what happened was, I'll never forget, I was in a therapy session and I was just kind of describing it. And my therapist was like, oh, so do you feel like you miss it? And I was like, what? And the reason why I responded with like, oh my gosh, no, never, ever, was because kind of the way the church teaches it, right? That we're taught to hate the things that God hates. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, for sure, getting to a place eventually where we do hate the things that the Lord hates. And the Lord hates a lot of things. If you read the Old Testament, he's very adamant what God hates. And even in the New Testament, Jesus reiterates the things that God hates. God hates divorce. God hates lying. God hates dishonesty. So many different things that God hates. It would take me forever to list them all. But so there was always this thing like, I need to hate it. And today I totally agree that I do. I need to hate the things that God hates. But in that moment, I was like, well, I'm not allowed to miss it. And I'll never forget my therapist saying, you know, it's actually normal to grieve the loss of an addiction, because that addiction created a relationship. And that addiction, it really promoted answers and solved problems that you actually were feeling. And so it was an illegitimate way to meet legit needs. And so at the same time, you still used it over and over and over again to try and meet those needs. So by doing so, a relationship was formed with an addiction. And it's normal when that is gone for a certain period of time to look back and actually miss it. And when he said that, it was like I was allowed to do something that I wasn't allowing myself to do. I never allowed myself to miss it or to grieve it or to even understand. I think so many times sexual addiction, pornography, masturbation is something we just want to avoid at all costs. And so we never take time to analyze, what were the problems I was trying to use sexuality to solve? What were the things in my heart that it posed to be a release of, or to be a comfort of? And I had to go on this journey. And so I think by me actually understanding that I had built a relationship with pornography and masturbation, I could then take the next steps to analyzing the relationship and understanding it more, and even crying over it, which is so interesting. I like that word better than weird, because weird is negative, right? Like when you say something's weird, there's a negative connotation to it. It's so interesting and intriguing to understand how we can miss something that was so damaging, so hurtful and painful.
Yeah, and I love that when you were talking to me, you were sharing with me how pornography, when you were using it, it was something that was a binky, you know, when you wanted comfort. It was something that you celebrated with, right? I mean, you did everything with it, every emotion. It was there. Right. It experienced every emotion there with you. So it makes sense that it was like a friend who just listened, which is so weird to like when you really think about like what we're saying right now. Because this solution just sat
Comfort.
with
Yeah.
you, comforted
Yeah.
you, celebrated with you, and it was the friend
Yeah.
that you had. That you didn't have to get a friend because you had this.
Yeah. It's true. There's all kinds of emotions, right? Like, let's say there was, I've tried to relate it to different hobbies that I have or other guys have had. And it's almost like, you know, when you're bored and you just want to veg, you pull out a video game or you pull up YouTube or you pull up things like that that are acceptable. And you're like, you know, hanging out with it. You know, let's say I wanted to go in my garage and work on a car. That would be like a hobby. And that was what pornography was at times. Just very curious. Like, oh, I wonder what this is, or I wonder what that is, or, you know, I've never looked up this before and I'm looking up that. And so it was like an intriguing, a curiosity, an engaging thing that I would use. Let's say I was sad. Let's say I had, you know, felt really down. Well, pornography and masturbation were there to make me feel comforted, like a binky for a child or a blanket to make me feel safe. Let's say there was an unsafe situation, or I was put down, or I felt unworthy, or I felt shame. Maybe I didn't do well in something in my life and I felt shame for not performing well. Well, the pornography and masturbation component told me that it was okay, that I could perform here. I was acceptable here. I was accepted here in this area. There was so many different things. A thing just to comfort all these different areas. If I was really stressed out, I could go there and just, man, the serotonin that would hit my brain after an orgasm was so relaxing. I could finally fall asleep versus feel all this anxiety and stress in my body. And so you're totally right, Charity. Like, it was just something that was completely effortless. I didn't have to actually risk rejection. When I text a friend right now and I say, "Hey, man, can we hang out?" He says, "No, man, I'm busy hanging out with somebody else." Whoa, I feel totally rejected. Pornography never rejected me. It never left me hanging in that regard. It was always there. It was always accessible. It was never too busy for me. And I never had flaws. Sometimes I hang out with a buddy and I hang out with a friend that says some things that make me feel bad. You know, it never really made me feel bad when I was engaged with it. Of course, afterward, there's so many different things we could talk about: the shame, the condemnation, the guilt, the feelings of just grossness. But in the middle of it, there wasn't that. There was just total enjoyment. And that's why, in my opinion, it's just such a strong addiction, because in the middle of it, there isn't a lot of pain that I'm experiencing. It all comes afterward. And I would easily forget about the after effects. I would look at what it was going to be like, experience it in the middle of it.
Well, I think, we've talked about this with some other people, and I think you don't realize how damaging the experience of pornography is until you're in a relationship under one roof with that person.
Yeah.
And because now you actually have somebody else that is impacted and gets the other sides, right? Where you're just by yourself. So yes, you feel shame and, just negative repercussions, but now you're living with somebody that you can share those emotions with, and instead choosing to run to something quote unquote easier, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask you something, when you were missing it, was there a sense of like you lost your identity where you didn't like know? Because I'm just imagining
That's a great question.
you're probably like, well, who am I without pornography? And where do I run to and where do I go to with all these emotions now? And did you feel like this sense of identity, like I just lost my best friend, so now who am I and where am I and what do I do?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And I know that we have some notes, and that question is not on our notes. And I feel like it was just a divine intervention that you asked that, because I completely lost my identity. And you probably know the answer before you asked it, because you got to live that out watching me. But I didn't know what to do. We were in a conversation last night with a group, a course that we're leading, and I'm so grateful for the people in these courses, man. Just a little quick plug: if you haven't really checked out our courses yet, you should go online and look up them. We've had so many couples go through it, and they continue to grow. And the community that's developed in these is probably my favorite thing to watch. Charity and I, most of the time, we're like, and we're just sitting here being quiet again, because we just kind of facilitate the meeting and lead the conversation. But then the conversation takes off, and there's tears, and there's breakthrough, and there's hope, and there's sadness, and there's grieving, and there's connection. And then you see a husband and wife maybe put his arm around her, and her head goes on his shoulder, and you're just like, oh, like that's why we do it, and it's awesome. So these podcasts are great, and you can get tips and nuggets, but man, you're going to get the meat and potatoes when you jump into a course and are really willing to do the work side by side with your spouse. And I say that because a guy mentioned the other day that once this was out of his life for even just a few months, he just didn't know who he was. And I just was like, oh my gosh, that was me. I had all these desires in my life. Going back to just getting to know me a little bit, I started music at the age of 14 years old, playing guitar. I started leading worship for my youth group at 14 and a half. And that was really fun. I did sports. I played tennis. I was into acting. I was into singing. I got into college, and I did music performance for about a year. And then I did music for a year. And then I changed over to business and studied business for a couple of years. And throughout this entire time, if I look back, I feel like I was just robbed. I feel like I never got to figure out my potential in those areas of music. I never got to really build awesome, strong, really strong friendships because of pornography. It got in the way of that. I feel like every time I needed to push through when something was hard, I gave up because I had an easy way out with my addiction. And so once I began to get sober, and really, I'm talking like actual heart change, not just white knuckling it, but like sobriety and really what people call recovery for like 3 to 6 months, I didn't have a lot of hobbies. I didn't have a lot of friends. Nobody really knew me except for the guys I was in recovery with. And those guys were great, but a lot of them were 20, 30 years older than me. So here I am, 25 years old, and the youngest guy in the group's 45 or 55. And we're just in different life stages. They have like kids. And I was like, I have a little kid, but I just couldn't connect with these guys in these groups for a while. And it felt very lonely. I didn't have guys my age that understood me and didn't have hobbies and didn't have like things to do when I was bored. And my relationship with Jesus was just really, really building during recovery. And that was probably the closest friendship I had, actually, was probably with the Lord. Me and you were really rocky. So it wasn't like we were in this best friend zone again. We were like, hi, I didn't relapse. And you're like, that's good. And you're like, I'm learning how to forgive you. I'm like, that's good. And okay, let's eat dinner now. And every week we try to do our touch points. But yeah, I just didn't know who I was. And so it began this journey of, okay, what am I going to do? And my opinion, this is one of the hardest times because I had to get back into things that I had neglected for a long time. And I had to get back into things that were, that I was kind of scared to do. And
it's like a midlife crisis.
It really was. I mean, that's a great way to put it.
And you're like, it's like you're reinventing yourself
Yeah,
and starting over, which is so not easy to do and very humbling. And it makes sense why guys just keep running back to it, because it's 100%. Harder to 100%. Come face to face with all this stuff.
I had to learn how to celebrate in different ways when things were really good. I had to learn how to celebrate. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not on social media. I can't post something on social media and get a bunch of likes and celebrate. So people be like, way to go. Like, I'm not on social media. I have to like text people. I'm like, how do you celebrate a good thing in life? What do you do? And so I had to learn how to celebrate. I had to learn how to be excited or journal or call somebody and say, man, I'm so pumped right now. Like this just happened. And it was like little things. Like maybe I did P90X in like later on. I had to learn how to celebrate the results. And so I actually had some guys that I connected to and said, hey, can we go on some workout stuff together? And they were excited for me. And I had to learn how to celebrate in a very healthy way. I had to learn how to be alone. I'll never forget that being by myself was one of the hardest things, because when I was by myself is when I acted out. And so now I have to learn how to sit by myself and not act out. And I learned that obviously I'm never alone with Christ, but even being alone with Jesus, not with another person or with something else to cure my loneliness, was really, really hard. I remember that I had to learn how to build friendships. And so we were in a small group with people. We went to the beach. I'll never forget the amount of anxiety I felt in my body when we were showing up to the beach one day to hang out with some friends that I didn't know. They weren't really friends yet. They were just, my Charity had a cousin who had some friends, and she said, hey, if you guys are looking for friends, I have friends. We're like, thank you for inviting us to be friends with your friends. And so we got invited to the beach to go hang out, and literally the amount of anxiety that filled my body, because I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. This isn't recovery. These aren't recovery brothers. So we're not going to talk recovery. They probably aren't even as real as I might be now, because I'm in the middle of my recovery journey. So I have to talk about things that I don't have a huge interest in. I'm not a big sports guy, which is even worse, because it was like I at the time I really didn't like beer, and I thought there was gonna be beer, and I'm like, I'm not a really big beer guy. That's gonna be interesting. I'm not a big sports guy, so I don't have a sports team. I don't have a football team or a baseball team, and these guys all have hobbies that I don't have. I'm barely getting into some hobbies, and they have like developed hobbies, and so it was just like, oh man, like that's pretty stressful. And I had to learn how to do all that. So you're right, Cher. It was like a midlife crisis. I picked up surfing and I was absolutely terrible, but I always wanted to learn how to surf. Can I add something though? Here's the deal. When you get to recreate yourself, it's like you have a blank canvas. So I literally sat down with my therapist, and this is kind of after grieving the relationship with pornography for a bit. But once I was ready to move on, because I think that's what has to happen. I was like, okay, now I have to move on. And my therapist was like, so Clinton, what do you want to do? And I'm like, this is the question I got asked in high school. Here I was graduating and I get to start over. And he's like, you get to start over right now. What do you want to do? And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, and I started going through this list, and maybe we'll do another podcast someday about that. But this list of, I want to learn how to surf. I want to learn how to get back into music. And I got a piano teacher online, and I started picking up piano again. And my piano skills right now are, they're like 1,000 times better than they've ever been. They're still not good enough to make a YouTube premiere, but maybe someday. But they're 1,000 times better. And I was able to be present with my kids. I started reading parenting books. I said, I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good husband. Started reading books about marriage and showing up authentically. I wanted to be a leader in this space of recovery, and obviously Restored to More was birthed around that time. There were all these things I really wanted to do and become and know how to be myself. Certain spiritual disciplines I wanted to develop that were really hard, but I was willing to go through them. And I think what I learned at like in literally mid-20s, like almost 30, was that everything you want to learn how to do is going to suck for like 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Sorry, you're doing great stuff here, and you're sharing great stuff. But I gotta like pause really quick.
Yeah. Please do. Go ahead. Sorry, I do. I just went on.
Why do you believe that you couldn't do those things and be in your addiction? Like, why now could you do those things, but you couldn't when you were in your addiction?
A few things come to mind. Space. I now have time. Pornography took up hours and hours and hours. If I wasn't watching pornography and masturbating, I was thinking about what I was going to watch and masturbate to. If I wasn't thinking about what I was going to watch, I was thinking about where I was going to watch it. Where's my access point? If I wasn't thinking about where I was going to watch it or what I was going to watch or wasn't watching it, I was thinking about when I was going to watch it, what I was going to do, or when the opportunity was going to arise. And if I wasn't thinking about those things, I was thinking about how to not watch it. And I was thinking about how to battle it and how to avoid it and how to all these things. And so you talk about just consuming my life. Consuming my life. And if I wasn't doing those things, I was at a job working, or I was doing things around the house, the to-dos that we all have on a daily basis, working a job, making a meal, getting ready, cleaning up. And so there's only a few hours I think there's only a few hours a day that we all have that aren't really taken up by things that we choose to do, or things that we do choose to do. And so with that, like 4 to 5 hours, maybe 6, if we're really blessed to have that free time to choose what we're going to do, we're either going to be very intentional with it, or if you're like me and you struggle with addiction is going to take over those hours.
Do you think that you ever got to a place where you are doing hobbies in your addiction, but then when the hobby got hard, you stopped because pornography, like when it got hard, you experience all these emotions, right? You're experiencing like, I can't do this, I'm not worthy, all these beliefs. And so then those beliefs led you into like, it just like capped you at this place, and it made you go back to the relationship, pornography, to like comfort you in those feelings.
I think what we're talking about is emotional maturity. We're talking about facing emotions and knowing how to handle them in a healthy way. And really, I think it keeps going back to what we talked about, grieving the loss of a toxic relationship. That's really what it is. I mean, you can call it an addiction. You can call it a toxic relationship. You can talk it about unwanted sexual behavior, unwanted sexual habits. But when we look at it through this lens, and I think there's different times to look at it through different lenses. And this lens would be, what about this relationship that was easy? I mean, how many guys can say that when things go bad, they have that person they can always call? Let's say they're not married, they're dating, they're playing the field, they're whatever they're doing. there's always maybe that one person they can call. They know like, oh yeah, we have a relationship where I can just call this person. And I'm not even talking about like hooking up and having sex, that too, maybe, but I'm saying like, even just for a text message conversation, just to be like, hey, how are you doing? And just be like, oh, I'm doing good. How are you? Just to feel connected. And I think what had to happen is I had to analyze that relationship and go, I've used this my whole life. Has it been helpful or hurtful? Has it actually solved these problems, or has it brought more pain into my life? So yeah, I think I was tempted previously, but I think now what was happening was the longer I was sober, the more I was maturing, the more I was spiritually developing, the more I was walking with Christ. Christ was giving me the ability to say no to certain things that were harmful, but even he was helping me say yes to things that were helpful. And even on days, so surfing is a great example. Surfing, I told my therapist I want to learn how to surf. He said, man, learning a new hobby in recovery is awesome. It's a great thing to do. I said, here's the problem. Surfing is probably the hardest sport because you're going against gravity, and it's like different than playing basketball or playing tennis or picking up racquetball or playing anything else, because it is tough. And most surfers will say that their first 2 years learning sucked. And I have to learn how to suck as a grown man. Like, that's a bad deal. I have to learn how to fall all the time. And on top of that, my father-in-law was an amazing surfer. My brother-in-law was a sponsored surfer. And so I'm going to have to get into this space and like really humble myself and ask questions from people who are really, really good, and they're full of grace, but they're really, really good. And so it was challenging. And so literally every day for a year, I just sucked. I was terrible. I would get my board, I would wax it, I'd get out there, and I would just literally fall off my board for like a solid 45 minutes to an hour. I would be absolutely exhausted. I could barely get out there every day and paddle out. And I just kept saying, I just got to get 1% better every day, 1% better. And there's so much mindset, right? So much success mindset. And we read success books all the time, and they're great. But I think that it takes somebody who is somewhat emotionally mature to begin that journey and not have an addiction they're going to as an easy way out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I can't tell you enough. Like, I really feel like I've seen you grow so much in just you moving past barriers and just seeing your potential just
Mm,
be so much greater when this is out, because your self-talk is different now. You believe that you are worthy, that you
mm,
can achieve things, you can accomplish things. You believe in yourself, because pornography, all these beliefs of shame and condemnation and I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy, and if you really knew, you knew what I was doing, and it lowered your belief in yourself that you could accomplish something and do
yeah,
something.
it's good.
And seeing you grow out of that into who you are today, just seeing how much more you've been able to be the person that God's created you to be, because you don't
Yeah.
have all these beliefs anymore that are ruling your life, because you're running back to something that makes that belief just like blow up so
Mm,
much more. And so I just want to say too,
so
like,
good. Thank you for saying that, babe.
yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Mm. And I just want to say too, it makes so much sense when you share everything that you did, why you would be grieving, you know?
Yeah.
And I really believe that we are both grieving, and we may not understand each other's
Mm,
grief,
wow, it's powerful.
but we are both grieving, and we're grieving over different things. And we will not understand each other. I don't think we can understand each other, because I haven't gone through what you've gone through and you haven't gone through what I've gone through, but there still can be this connection point. And I always want couples who are listening to our story to know that there's so many emotions that you
Mm,
both are experiencing that
yeah.
are so similar.
Wow.
The experiences of the certain circumstance that you're going through are not the same,
Yeah.
but the emotions are.
Yeah.
And me and you always talk about how you can connect so much over experiencing the same emotions.
Yeah.
You don't need to have the same circumstance, right?
Yeah.
But
No.
you still can connect
Yep.
so
On those
deeply
feelings.
on the
Yep.
feelings.
Yep.
And I think that's what we both did. Is I realized, whoa, you're grieving? Because at
Yep.
first I didn't understand it. I did not understand why you were grieving. And then I just said, okay, this is your journey. This is your process.
Yeah.
It makes sense because this was your best friend. When I heard it all, it didn't make sense logically to me because I've never understood that. But I could put myself in the shoes of, oh, I've lost a best friend, but nothing to the extent that you have. And so
And we're
realizing that you
talking
were
for a long time.
grieving.
We're talking from 11 years
Oh
old.
my
We're
gosh.
talking over a decade.
Hmm.
of daily being there
Mm-hmm.
at times, sometimes more than once daily. Keep
Mm-hmm.
going.
And so not having that thing anymore in your life
Yeah.
is like, whoa, and then vice versa with me grieving the relationship
Yeah.
and what I thought that we had in the marriage I thought we had,
Yeah.
and being able to connect on that
Mm.
was really healing for us in our relationship.
I didn't realize that I had to grieve. So honestly, what I'm hoping for in this podcast, I hope that you hear this and you're like, wow, let me talk about this with my therapist. Let me talk about this with my coach. Let me just even analyze this and journal about it. Do I miss pornography? Do I miss masturbation? What did it do for me? What did I experience? And I think what happened was once I could actually analyze what it did for me, then I could analyze, was it a healthy relationship? I had to be very real and almost show up in that conversation and realize that that's only the first part is like, do you miss it? Like, yes, I miss it. Okay, well, it doesn't mean go back to it. Why do you miss it? What did that relationship do for you? What problems did it solve? And then from there go, now did it really solve those problems? Let's analyze that. Because I think what happened was after I was aware that I was allowed and I gave myself the ability to miss it and to go, man, I really miss this. I miss just being accepted all the time. And I miss being busy. And I feel like I'm alone. I feel bored. I feel like something's missing from my life. Like something's missing. Then it was like, okay, well, did that even really do a good job filling it? And it was like, no, it didn't. Like it left me more hungry. It was like drinking salt water. Like I thought that it was craving, it was satisfying my thirst. But actually, when I guzzled down salt water, I was more thirsty afterward. And I was like, now I'm parched because what I was really longing for was something real. And as I began to meet those needs in a real way, in a healthy way, I no longer needed the toxic relationship, did I want, nor did I want the toxic relationship. I think at some point you realize this relationship is toxic. It's not helpful. And even though it did try to serve a purpose all these years, I can look back now and realize like I don't need that in my life anymore. And I don't want it. I don't want to be hurt anymore. In fact, this relationship over here with pornography and masturbation addiction, it actually hurt me a lot. And it hurt other things around me. It hurt my wife, it hurt my kids, it hurt my relationship with the Lord. And I think a lot of times we jump to that point. We go, yes, it's painful, it hurts, I need to get rid of it. But we never allow the full healing to take place and go, well, why did you go to it? And are you going to miss it? And so I didn't grieve it for a long time. It wasn't like 5 months of grieving. It was probably, for everyone, time frame is different, but for me, it wasn't very long. And I was able to cry about it and miss it and actually grieve it and then go, you know what? It is gone though. And now I want to find healthy ways to meet those needs instead of having a relationship with someone that's going to be toxic and is going to cause more pain and more harm to everything in my life that I love.
That was so good. I want to ask you a question now.
Yeah.
Do you still miss pornography?
It's a great question. I think what happened is I look back and I see how it met those needs, or it didn't meet. I tried to meet those needs with pornography. But I think after a couple years of sobriety, it was realizing like it didn't even meet those needs. And I tell guys now, it's like, what did that relationship really cause in my life? And I just start crying about it because there were so many things that it ruined. I think I'd be a different musical artist today if I'd actually dedicated all that time and energy into music. I would be a different Christian today. I would be able to love more and be there for more people and show up. I think I'd be a more patient husband. And the one that hurts my heart the most is I know I would be a different husband and we wouldn't have this conversation. We wouldn't even be here today. I know how much it hurt you. So no, I definitely don't miss a toxic relationship that caused that much pain. And I'm grateful that today I know healthy ways to meet those needs of being alone or being scared or being stressed or being anxious. And it isn't just, oh, go read the Bible. I think that God's word, of course, is alive and it's real and it cuts through bone and marrow But what's become real is the relationship with Jesus, the relationship with other believers, the relationship with you. I mean, now we're closer than ever because I can come to you with those emotions. And I can run you and say, Charity, I feel really alone. Can we just be together right now and just sit together? And you're like, yeah. And sometimes you're like, right now I'm really busy. I mean, you've never really said no if I really need you. But it's not like I don't just rely on you. I rely on my friends. I have friends now. Yesterday I was on the phone with a dude for an hour and we just talked about life. It was fun. I have guys I meet up with for coffee. I have guys I Marco Polo across the world and that are doing ministry, and I have hobbies. And so all these different emotions that I use pornography for, I don't miss it anymore. If we just have the lens of relationship on, no, I don't miss that relationship anymore. And I'm really grateful for that.
I'm grateful too. I just think that when you were talking, I just like saw stages, and I really believe that you can't get to the place where you're at unless you remove yourself from the relationship, right? It's like you being in a toxic relationship and then you get removed. And we always talk about this, like when you put your hand up against like to your face, you don't know that it's a hand, right? Like you can't see because it's so close to you. And I believe that that's what pornography is. Pornography is so close to your face, you don't really see what it is for what it is. And then when you remove it, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a hand. And it really puts things into perspective. You have to remove something in order to see it for what it is. Yeah. And I think that's what happened is once you removed yourself from being so close to it, you were able to see, oh, wow, this is what it's doing to me, my relationships around me. And no, I do not miss that because I've experienced the real thing over here. Yeah. And that's what you've experienced real relationships where it's both people, right? Yeah. Where there's true intimacy, where you are being fully known and vice versa. The other person is being fully known back with you. And at the end of the day, that's ultimately what you were desiring and wanting. You wanted connection. You wanted to be known, and you got the opportunity to be known in other circles of men and with me and with other people. And it's been reciprocated. Yeah. And it's been what we were ultimately designed for. And there's no negative repercussions afterward. Sorry, keep going. Yeah, no, it's good. And I love what we're saying. Now, here's the deal. I want to say this real quick. It doesn't mean that we're never tempted. Yeah. It doesn't mean, but what we're talking about is a relationship, meaning an addiction. I'm never tempted to go back to a relationship, to an addiction, to a lifelong relationship with that. There are times where Satan, of course, wants to tempt, and my brain wants to bring up and thinks, oh man, this was legit. But that's why we talk about finishing the fantasy. There are times where I'm tempted to go and like, oh man, don't you miss your old life? Your life where you could do whatever you wanted, and there was that you could just hide it and you could perform and you could actually be a functioning addict. And when I really continue, what happens is when I'm tempted and I'm really thinking about that or whatever, maybe it's a legit temptation. I call a buddy or I talk to you about it and I say, hey, I was having this temptation, because it's not wrong to be tempted. There's nothing wrong with being tempted. In fact, it might mean you're doing the right thing, because Satan wants you to go back to something where you're ineffective. But for me, I call people and I go, hey, I need to walk you through this temptation. Can we just walk through what would actually happen if I lived out this life? And when I walk through what that would look like, we call that finishing the fantasy. When you finish out the fantasy and you really, really walk it out, it's amazing how much pain I have afterward, and regret, and just even sorrow. And it loses its power, in my opinion. So that's why there's no desire to build that relationship again with pornography, masturbation, because it was a one-sided relationship like you're talking about. And you're right. What I longed for was a two-sided relationship, and really one that only Christ can satisfy. You're great. I love you. My friends are awesome. My buddies are good. My legit friendships are really good. But even all of those are going to fall short compared to Christ. And I really think that the key here was that my relationship with him got really developed, and he started meeting those needs. And he also recommended other things and showed me other things like you and friendships and even hobbies and things that are fun that he created and he intended us to do, and find the fulfillment in those things and in himself above all, other than obviously pornography and masturbation. So good. Well, guys, I hope that this added some sort of value or just hope to your story. And I'm grateful that you guys listening to our conversation. And I'm grateful, babe, that you don't miss it anymore and that you are a new man who knows how to run to other things when your emotions get hot.
Thank you, baby. I love you.
Love you.
All right, guys. Until next time.